I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. The thought of exploring old, forgotten buildings, where history has been left to decay, thrilled me. So when my friends and I decided to check out the old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town, I jumped at the chance. Little did I know, that night would change everything. PHP Kapiravat Coat. The hospital had been closed for decades, a victim of budget cuts and scandal. It was a sprawling complex, with multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels. The locals whispered about the horrors that took place there, cruel experiments, mistreatment of patients, and even unexplained disappearances. But we were skeptical. To us, it was just a creepy old building, perfect for a night of urban exploration. We arrived just after sunset, the sky painted with the dying light of day. Armed with flashlights and cameras, we made our way through the overgrown grounds. The main entrance was boarded up, but we found an open window around the back and climbed inside. The interior was a maze of dark hallways and empty rooms. Peeling paint hung from the walls, and broken furniture lay scattered on the floor. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. As we ventured deeper into the building, the sense of unease grew stronger. It felt as if the walls were closing in on us, the shadows watching our every move. We decided to split up to cover more ground. I took the east wing, a long corridor lined with patient rooms. Most were empty, but a few contained remnants of their former occupants, tattered clothing, old photographs, and rusty medical equipment. I paused in one room, studying a photo of a young woman. Her eyes seemed to follow me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As I moved further down the corridor, I heard it. A faint whispering, just beyond the edge of my hearing. I stopped, straining to listen, but the sound faded away. I shook off the feeling of unease and continued, determined to document my findings. I reached the end of the corridor and entered a large room. It was once a common area, judging by the scattered chairs and tables. In the center of the room was a massive, ornate fireplace, its hearth cold and empty. As I approached, the whispering started again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from the fireplace. I knelt down and peered inside, shining my flashlight into the darkness. There, etched into the brick, were strange symbols and markings. They looked old, ancient even, and I had no idea what they meant. As I traced my fingers over the carvings, the whispering grew louder, more frantic. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping and echoing through the room. I stood up, my heart pounding. The room felt colder, and I could see my breath in the air. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I ran to it, pulling and yanking, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and I pounded on the door, screaming for help. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening, and I could feel a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there it was, a shadowy figure, standing in the corner of the room. It was tall and thin, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It took a step towards me, and I backed up against the door, my heart racing. The whispering voices were now a cacophony, each word blending into the next, filling my mind with fear. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door burst open, and my friends pulled me out of the room. I collapsed in the hallway, gasping for breath. They had heard my screams and came running. We didn't waste any time, we fled the building, not stopping until we were safely outside. We never spoke about what happened that night. The experience left us all shaken, and we swore never to return. But the memory of that shadowy figure, the whispering voices, and the cold, oppressive presence still haunts me. I often wonder what those symbols meant, and what kind of darkness had been trapped in that fireplace. Months later, I did some research on the hospital. I discovered that it had been built on the site of an old asylum, which had been burned down after a series of mysterious deaths. The symbols I saw matched those used in ancient rituals, meant to summon or trap spirits. It seemed that the hospital was not just a place of suffering, but a gateway to something far more sinister. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that hospital. I hear whispers in the night, see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. The past has a way of reaching out, and some places are best left alone. Despite my friends' warnings and my own better judgment, I couldn't stay away from the hospital. The unanswered questions gnawed at me, and I needed to understand what we had encountered. So, I returned one final time, armed with more knowledge and a healthy dose of fear. This time, I wasn't alone. I had reached out to a paranormal investigator, someone with experience in dealing with the unknown. Together, we entered the hospital, following the same path I had taken months before. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of the building's dark history pressing down on us. We made our way to the fireplace, and the investigator began setting up equipment, cameras, audio recorders, and strange devices designed to detect paranormal activity. As he worked, I explained what had happened, describing the symbols and the whispering voices. The investigator nodded, his expression serious. He had encountered similar cases before, he said, places where the past refused to rest. According to him, the symbols were indeed part of an ancient ritual, one meant to bind spirits to a specific location. It seemed that someone had attempted to trap the restless souls of the asylum within the fireplace, using dark magic to contain their rage and suffering. As we spoke, the temperature in the room began to drop. I could see my breath once again, and the whispering started up, faint at first, then growing louder. The investigator remained calm, instructing me to stay close and not to show fear. He began to chant softly, his words foreign and rhythmic. Suddenly, the room was filled with a bright light, and the whispering stopped. In the silence that followed, I felt a sense of peace, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The investigator smiled, his face illuminated by the glow of his equipment. He explained that the ritual had been completed, and the spirits were finally at rest. The hospital, he said, was no longer a place of darkness. We left the building as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. I felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that the horrors of the past had been laid to rest. But as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, watching us from the shadows. I glanced back one last time, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the window, its eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me with only the memory of that fateful night and the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved. I've always been drawn to abandoned places, the allure of forgotten histories and decaying structures. Exploring these sites filled me with a sense of excitement and mystery, and the old psychiatric hospital was no exception. When my friends and I set out that night, we had no idea what we were getting into. The hospital had been shuttered for years, its history tainted by budget cuts and scandal. It was a vast complex, a series of buildings connected by dark, winding tunnels. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the atrocities that occurred within its walls, patients subjected to cruel experiments, maltreatment, and mysterious disappearances. To us, it was the perfect spot for a night of exploration and adventure. The evening was fading when we arrived, the last rays of sunlight giving way to twilight. We had flashlights and cameras ready, eager to capture whatever we might find. The main doors were sealed, but we found a way in through a broken window. Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of deserted corridors and vacant rooms, the remnants of its past scattered and decaying. The air inside was heavy, filled with dust and the musty scent of neglect. Every step we took seemed to echo in the silence, amplifying our apprehension. It wasn't long before we decided to split up, each of us eager to uncover our own piece of the hospital's history. I chose the East Wing, a section lined with old patient rooms, most of them empty and forgotten. But in some rooms, I found traces of the past, personal belongings left behind, medical equipment rusted and unused. One room held a photograph of a young woman, her eyes haunting and seemingly alive. As I moved deeper into the wing, I began to hear a faint whispering, barely audible but persistent. It sent chills down my spine, and I strained to listen, but it faded into silence. I reached the end of the hallway and stepped into a larger room, once a communal area. In the center stood a grand fireplace, its ornate design incongruous with the decay around it. As I approached, the whispering grew louder, coming from within the hearth. Etched into the bricks were ancient symbols, their meaning lost to time. I traced my fingers over the markings, and the whispers intensified, filling the room with a dissonant chorus. I felt the temperature drop, my breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged as I struggled to open it, my efforts in vain. Behind me, a presence loomed, and I turned to see a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. I backed against the door, heart pounding as the whispers reached a fever pitch. Then, the door burst open, and my friends pulled me out, saving me from whatever had been in that room. We fled the hospital, never to return, but the memory of that night haunted us all. Months later, I researched the hospital's history and discovered it had been built over an old asylum, destroyed in a fire after numerous mysterious deaths. The symbols I had seen were part of ancient rituals meant to trap spirits, suggesting the hospital was a gateway to something sinister. Even now, I hear whispers at night and see shadows move at the edge of my vision. The past has a way of reaching out, and some places are best left undisturbed. Despite my friends' warnings and my own fears, I couldn't stay away from the hospital. The unanswered questions gnawed at me, compelling me to return one last time. This time, I wasn't alone. I contacted a paranormal investigator, someone experienced with the unknown, and together we braved the dark halls once more. The investigator set up his equipment, and I recounted my previous experience. He explained that the symbols were part of an ancient ritual to bind spirits, suggesting the hospital was a site of dark magic meant to trap suffering souls. As he spoke, the temperature dropped, and the whispers returned. The investigator began a ritual, and the room filled with light, the whispers ceasing. He assured me the spirits were at rest and the hospital was no longer a place of darkness. We left at dawn, a sense of relief washing over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As we walked away, I glanced back and thought I saw a figure in the window, its eyes glowing with the same unnatural light. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me with the haunting memory of that fateful night and the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved.